Meantime, as we think about solutions to bridging the urban-rural divide, some of you have offered some really interesting suggestions. For example, Ken writes, our Oregon Senate makeup could be changed to have one senator from each county. The United States Senate has 2 senators from each state. I wonder why Oregon has this unfair Senate representation to give more weight to the population centers. Well, that is an interesting point, Ken. Let's dig into that for a minute. First, the issue of why Oregon's legislature gives more weight to the population centers, the big cities. Most of Oregon's population is grouped in the greater Portland area and in the Willamette Valley and Eugene. This is a map from Portland State Population Research Center. Each dot here represents 46 people. Each color is a different race. Those dots pretty much paint the picture of where people live and where the political power lives as well. Things are pretty thin over there on the eastern part of the state. Oregon's legislature is set up so that each person elected to the state house represents 70,621 people. There are 60 representatives in Oregon, way more on the west side of the state than on the east side. The people elected to the state Senate, they each represent 141,242 people. Oregon has 30 senators. So you can see why the west side is so heavily represented. There are just way more people. In fact, political scientist Jim Moore sent me information showing that in eastern Oregon, there are just 5 senators and 9 House reps, just 14 members out of the legislature that has a total of 90. So that's why folks in eastern Oregon feel like they have no political power. It's because they have no political power. So what about that idea to scrap the population-based metrics for the state Senate at least, and just have one senator from each county? Well, here's Professor Moore.
Well, that's a great idea, except for one fatal flaw. The Supreme Court of the United States has said you can't do that. Up until the mid-1960s, states were actually fairly free in how they distributed how many senators there were and where they came from, how many representatives there were, where they came from. And it was pretty common in a lot of places to have at least one representative or senator from every county. Okay, so great stuff. But the Supreme Court looked at that in the 1960s and in a couple of rulings said, no, you can't do that because the Constitution says one person, one vote.
Which might leave you saying, well, now hold on. What about the U.S. Senate? Well, you are correct. The framers of the Constitution worried about this very issue. And that's why the Senate is the way it is. Way back in 1787, during the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, the more populated states said the number of reps and senators for each state should be based on the number of people living in their states. Well, that would give the big states more power, but they argued they deserved that more power because they contributed more money and more defense to the nation. The smaller states, though, they weren't buying that. They objected and they demanded equal representation in the Senate. And it went back and forth for a couple of months. But then finally, on July 16th in 1787, the sides agreed to a compromise. The House would be based on the size of the state. The Senate, though, would get 2 members from every state, and financial members could only start in the U.S. House. So it does seem kind of odd that 173 years later or so, the Supreme Court would say you can't use the same system. So is there another way?
Before partisanship became as strong in Oregon, the way that you did that is you made coalitions within the Oregon legislature. You also worked in other ways. For instance, there's something called the Association of Oregon Counties. All the county commissioners are part of it. That used to be a real hotbed of ideas that were then implemented in counties or went to the legislature to become state law. But with partisanship becoming so strong, it's become Republicans and Democrats.
Which, to those of you who enjoy history, will know that's something that our founding president, George Washington, cautioned against during his farewell address in 1796. He warned our nation not to give in to partisan bickering, that it would weaken the Union. How do you think we're doing? Now, let's take a look at some of your comments on our series before I give you my opinion on all this. Let's start with Steve in Clackamas County, who brings up another aspect of this greater Idaho movement that he says would affect folks across the state.
Another point that should be brought out is the recreational aspect of Eastern Oregon. I'm a hunter and a hiker and an outdoorsman, And if we move to Idaho, we will lose all our resident hunting rights, and we'll also be charged out-of-state fees for non-resident hunting, which are very, very steep. So I'm not ultra-conservative, not ultra-liberal, but I am an Oregonian, third generation, and this is just a bunch of nonsense, okay? We need to take care of these people, and we need to do the right thing. Thanks for your...
Another theme from what we've seen over the past few days is how some of you perceive this movement to be less about politics and more about race. Jason says, giving this movement the air that you are giving it is lending something absurd to a degree of legitimacy. You are, in effect, feeding the trolls. And in this case, these trolls are actually advocating for this movement out of nothing other than an inherent desire to form an even more white region. In the end, that's what all of this is actually about. But Lee has a different thought. The people of Eastern Oregon are simply tired of all the Portland politics. It's not some far-right movement. The left thinks everyone should think like them, or you're a far-right extremist. That is so far from the truth.
And I want to tell you that I am enjoying very much the discussion over East and West Oregon and a possible divorce. I've been here about 15 years. I tend to agree with East Oregon.
And how about this from Mike last night? I live in Medford and am not in favor of Greater Idaho. Why? Because Idaho deserves better. Oregon sucks. Instead, I would encourage people to leave Oregon. I know it's not easy, but thousands are doing that. I'm leaving too. Closed on our house sale today. Bye-bye, or okay. We certainly got our fair share of comments just like that from Mike, but let's end things on a lighter note.
I just wanted to say that I have found your series on Eastern Oregon extremely interesting and helpful, and made me realize a lot of things I did not know. It just seems that we could make a few slight changes that would help Eastern Oregon and Multnomah County have very different problems.
And Bob says, I wanted you folks at KGW to know that providing a brief series discussing the Greater Idaho notion really has had an impact on me. I'm suddenly aware of a need to seriously consider the differences in lifestyles and recognize that the folks to the east have got to be given more of a voice in our state government. And there's this from Sue. I am a Multnomah County voter who now plans to take a road trip to Eastern Oregon, including John Day. This series made me think. I appreciate the thoughtful comments of my fellow Oregonians. And finally, there is this from Bill. More than ever, we need this kind of conversation to get a better understanding of each other and how we really feel. That's the great thing about the story. It always feels more like a conversation rather than a news story. Thanks for that, Bill. That's what we're trying to do here on our show. We want to take you to a new place, give you a new perspective, make you think new thoughts, maybe learn something that you didn't understand about a complex topic that affects you or your loved ones. We're not a traditional news show. We try hard not to be traditional. And finally, here's my opinion on all this. First off, if you somehow missed my nightly statements on Greater Idaho, I don't believe it's ever going to happen. And it's nowhere near reaching a point where it's formally approved by anyone. Yes, there is a bill to get things going in the Idaho legislature, and it did pass one side of the legislature, but looks like it's dead on the other side. In Oregon, there's also a bill supporting the idea, but it is also dead. And nothing will happen until both legislatures agree and pass a bill, and then both governors would have to sign off on the bill, which also is not going to happen, and then Congress would have to approve it, which really is not going to happen. So everybody, just take a breath. The reason we went to Eastern Oregon is because people there feel belittled and ignored and dismissed. Now, whether you think those are valid feelings or not is not the point. They do feel that way, and they deserve to be respected and heard. I appreciate the fact that each person I spoke with trusted me enough to tell me what they were really feeling about this urban-rural divide and how the rest of us might help out with that a little bit. One of the biggest things, they hate citizen initiatives created and passed by people who live right here in Multnomah County that are implemented across the state. Things are different in John Day than Portland. They don't think they should have to live under rules created to address problems in the big city. And I think they're right. Somebody suggested limiting citizen initiatives to the county where they start. I think that's an interesting idea. Have a problem in Multnomah County that the state legislature is ignoring? Great. Write an initiative and fix the problem in Multnomah County. Now, we got a ton of feedback from you on these reports, hundreds of emails and voicemails. Thank you. It shows that you care. Some of you are understanding, and some of you ridiculed those living out east. I think that's part of the problem. We need to listen with empathy and understanding, not judgment. Let's find the places where we agree and compromise in the places where we don't. Maybe you ought to get in your car, take a road trip out east, spend some money at the local businesses, get to know some of the people who live out there. I think you'll be impressed. I know I was. It's not us versus them. It's us versus us. This problem's been growing for a long time here in Oregon. I think we should each consider what we can each do to help make things better. That's my opinion anyway. What's yours? You don't have to agree with me, although the voice in my head says, yeah, but you should. But you should also communicate. Send me an email, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com. or call and leave a voicemail. It's 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you.